Hello, I'm Brian. Welcome to my fourth wood turning video. Today I'd like to show you how we do what you might call bowl turning, a different way of attaching wood to the lathe. I've got what they call a bowl block here. You know, it's been prepared, ready for putting on the lathe. It's already been made round. The only trouble is it's hardly big enough for a bowl. If you want to make something like this, a proper bowl, then obviously you want a much bigger piece of wood to start with. But I've got this one, and I've got another one similar to this, and so on the lathe, different ways of putting wood on the lathe, as I mentioned before in my earlier video. One way I spoke about was to use a wood turning chuck like this, where it's got the jaws here which would hold the piece of wood. But in order to do that, you've got to shape the wood first and create like a socket in the bottom like there is on here. So they've got a recess there, a dovetail shape. So you have to create that first before you can mount the wood on the lathe. So that is a bit of a problem, obviously. An alternative to that is the old-fashioned screw chuck, which is like this. So this fits into a wood chuck, and you screw this into the wood to hold it in place. But the trouble with this is that if you screw that into the wood, then it's going to leave a hole there, which could be a problem. So I prefer a different method to those two, where I use a hot melt glue gun, and I've started turning what would be the underside of the bowl there. I've roughed that out, and I've roughed out the edge of the bowl just to make it round, and it wants shaping nicely, obviously. And then we've got the front side, which will need to be hollowed out to actually form the bowl. The other thing to point out here is that this bowl blank has been cut with the grain running sideways, and that means that when you actually do the turning, as you turn the wood on the edge, then you're going to be doing end grain at one time, like here. This would be end grain, so you'll get a rough finish there, and then as it comes round, where you're actually cutting along the grain here, so you get a much smoother finish. So you get a smooth finish there, a rough finish here, a smooth finish there, and then a rough finish there. So obviously that makes life more difficult when cutting the wood compared to doing spindle turning, which I showed you in an earlier video. Because of this difficult grain, I'm going to use a scraper chisel to finish off. Right, so the types of scraping chisel I've got. This one I showed you in an earlier video, where you've got the grind which is almost at 90 degrees, and the actual cutting edge is here, and that's a straight cutter. Another one I've got is more curved, so that's useful for getting into curved shapes. You can see that there. Or there's a skewed chisel here, which also could be used for scraping, but its main function is for doing planing cuts to get a smooth finish, which I'll show you that later stage. But because we're doing the back of the bowl and there's very limited space to get in there, I've got this homemade scraper that I've made up. If you can see that, this is a piece of an old saw blade that I've used here, high-speed steel, and sharpened that and fitted it on this handle so that I can get in and swivel this round with the screw, so I can get into difficult places. So that's for the angle of this now, because I'm coming for the bend, and I'll move this up a bit closer, like so. So I can now start to come round the bend. And I'll come around the bend a bit more. Like so. Rounding off. Right, let's have a look at that then. There's just one or two marks in there still, so I need to take a little bit out of there more. But because of this coarse grain, this is very, very hard to do without it tearing between the individual layers. I'll just take a bit more of that out. Just check that now. Yeah, that looks okay there now. So the next stage is to do the edge of the bowl. So I need to alter this. So we do the edge of the bowl now then. Need to check that. Bit dusty here. Right. So here where we're running along the grain, it's obviously nice and smooth, and where we're cutting across the end grain, it's quite rough, but the grain hasn't really torn out much. But there are some stripes there showing, so I need to take a bit more off that. Yeah, there's still some lines there, but I think I need to sharpen this a bit. I'll leave it there. I'll sharpen this and take a touch more off. But that's the basic principle of working on the bottom side of the bowl and then coming round to the side. And then the next thing will be to hollow out the front of the bowl. So I've just got to rearrange things now. Right, I've repositioned the tool rest so I can now do the front of the bowl. So this has got to be hollowed out here. So I'm using this gouge and we'll make a start. So I've made a start there, as you can see, and it's just a question of keep going further and further until we get the depth that we want. The other thing, of course, is you mustn't go too deep, otherwise we'll be going through the bottom of the bowl. So one way of dealing with the depth thing is what some people do, is to fit a drill in the tailstock end and drill into the centre there and measure the depth that the drill's going to have to go, so that once you've done that, you've then got a hole partially drilled and you can keep removing the wood until you get to the bottom of the drill hole and you know the depth is then set. But or the alternative way, which is what I'm going to do, is just measure from the front here and measure the depth, but we're nowhere near doing that yet. So it's just a question of hollowing out more and more until we get to the final depth, and then obviously probably using the scraper again, either this one or any scraper will do for this, because it's easy to get the tool in there, whereas when I did the back, if you remember, there's restricted access there, and that's why I wanted to use this one, which is set at an angle. I've finished turning the bowl, and now I need to get it off the lathe and finish off its bottom. I've got the bowl off the lathe where I've cut through the wood that was holding it on, and now I've just got to remove the last disc of wood which is held on with the hot melt glue. So all I've got to do is warm that up and then I can lift that off. So there's the finished bowl. The bottom's all finished now. And the main advantage of using the hot melt glue method of sticking it on means that I've wasted very little width of the original bowl blank. I've only lost about 2 millimeters of the original width, whereas other methods would have obviously used up more than that. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you. Goodbye.